transform, inspire, and multiply. Now, I drew the short end of the straw because you can't really talk about transformation in any way that attempts to explain it, because all you do is diminish it. And so tonight and tomorrow morning, I do want to address transformation, but I want to do it in a little different way. I want to illustrate it. I want to hold it up and let you admire it. But there's not going to be much explanation about that mysterious, powerful, God-breathed thing that must be a part of our experience of what it means to be people of faith. Mike prayed in his prayer, let us be passionate. And passion is a part of what it means to be a transformed people. And so I hope tonight what I say about a transforming faith might be something that would be encouraging to you. Gavin, is it? Yeah. Do you know the difference between kicking a rock and kicking a really big dog? Take your leg, your foot, move it in a particular way, and you can just kick a rock, and you know what? That rock takes the momentum of your leg, transfers it into momentum, and what does it do? It rolls away, doesn't it? Because a rock essentially is passive. It has no power of its own. It creates no new power when you kick it. It just takes the energy from your leg and transfers that energy and moves at the speed and in the direction you've imparted to it. You don't get anything more out of a rock than you put into it. Right? There's nothing surprising that happens when you kick a rock, unless it's a big rock and you kick it hard, then maybe that's surprising. You get out of rocks what you put into them. I forgot I was doing this, sorry. Now, things are a little different when you kick a dog. Especially if the dog is particularly large and ill-tempered. Now you draw back your leg. It's the same leg. It's the same foot. It's the same motion. And you impart your energy to the dog, but something's a little different this time, isn't it? Because the dog is not passive. In fact, the dog, once you kick it, is going to be quite active. The dog is going to take the energy that you're attempting to transfer to it, and it's not just going to transfer that energy, it's going to transform that energy into foaming at the mouth, rabid rage, and it will attempt to take your leg off. Because, see, a dog has an energy source of its own. A dog doesn't just take your energy, it adds to your energy with energy of its own. And what you get from the dog isn't just what you put into the dog, it's what you put into the dog and then every fiber of energy that dog has. Kicking a dog is a very different matter than kicking a rock. Okay, so are we agreed on that? You get it? What I want to know is why faith has such a reputation of being so rock-like. Where did we ever get the idea that kicking faith is kind of like kicking a rock? You stop people on the street, you ask them what their impression of faith, religion, the Christian life is, and you may well get this response: well, it's kind of predictable, frankly. You get out of it about what you put into it. There's nothing surprising about faith. There's nothing special particularly about faith. I've been to church before. It didn't do much for me. See, there it is. Faith as a rock. Faith that has no energy of its own. Faith where there are no surprises, there are no eye-opening moments. Faith where there's no fear involved. You just draw back your leg and you kick it, and you get out of it about what you put into it. You know, if you impart a certain amount of energy, you're going to get a certain benefit back. You kick it, it rolls. I wonder if people think that about faith because too often that's what we think. Do you ever find yourself thinking about faith in that particular way? Yeah, give faith a kick. Put a little energy into it. Keep the rules, check the boxes, show a little discipline, a little self-control, and over time, with some better habits, you'll be a different person. But don't expect anything to happen dramatically. Don't expect something to come over you that you can't explain, that you don't understand. Don't expect to change overnight. Faith, you see, for many of us is about the long term. It's about incremental changes. It's about learning to think differently and to behave differently. You got to kick faith down the road, and then you run after it, and you kick it again, and then you chase it a little further, and you kick it again, and eventually, at the end of life, you kick faith through the goalposts. The race is finished. The crown is won. Hallelujah. Is that how faith works? Is that what we're about? Is that what we're talking to the world about? Is that what we're modeling to the world? Because Jesus thinks something very different from that. That's not how Jesus thinks about faith at all. For Jesus, faith is a whole lot like kicking a large dog. Oh yeah, you can put a certain amount of energy into faith, but I promise you, in the mind of Jesus, what you get back from faith is far more, far different, far other than anything you can put into it. In fact, Jesus would tell you, you kick faith, and you're going to get back 30 times, 60 times, 100 times what you put into it. And that's a message we need to hear all over again. Let me get arranged. Oh, that's better. Jesus told a lot of parables in his ministry. He told parables about girls with lamps and good Samaritans. He told parables about wedding feasts and lots of parables. But some of those parables address the whole issue of faith and transformative power. He told a number of those. He told stories that say to us, faith is not a rock. You don't just get out of faith what you put into faith. In fact, these parables tell us that if ever we dare to kick faith, and Jesus wants us to kick faith, what we're going to get back from faith is something far bigger, far more different than anything we put in. I call these the parables of ferment. And I want to give you just a few examples of the kind of parables that Jesus told to illustrate this. And if you want to, in just a minute we're going to get to Matthew 13. So if you have your Bibles with you, you could turn there and look at that. For instance, he talked about faith being like a new piece of cloth. You don't take new cloth and patch an old garment. Why? Well, you've washed the old garment. All the dynamic has left the old garment. And if you take a new cloth that still has some movement to it and patch that old garment, you're going to make the hole even worse. You're going to destroy the patch. You're going to destroy the cloak. Don't do that. Jesus said that's what faith is like. Faith is like a new piece of cloth. It moves. It changes. There is power to it. And if you slap faith on your old, hard, much washed life, be careful. It'll rip a hole in you. Because faith is powerful. He talked about faith being like new wine. You don't take new wine and put it in old wineskins. Those old wineskins have gotten hard and inflexible, and new wine is still fermenting. It's bubbling. There is power there. There is force there. And if you put new wine into old skins, it's so powerful it'll split the skin and the wine will fall. That's how faith is, said Jesus. If you take this dynamic, powerful, transformative thing called faith and pour that into your old hard habits, your old stuck in the rut life, it's going to split you apart. Faith is that powerful. He talked about faith as a seed. And the seed goes in the ground, and it doesn't really matter whether you understand what's happening. It doesn't matter whether you can explain what faith is doing. Faith is going to go in the ground, and whether you're asleep or awake, whether you understand it or not, faith is going to set down roots. It's going to produce a crop. And it does that. Do you see the phrase? All by itself. Because faith is powerful. Do you hear that? Jesus tells these stories of ferment to talk to us about what faith really is. And faith isn't a matter of kicking a rock. Faith is this living, dynamic, transformative thing. And if ever you kick true faith, it's going to do something to you and in you you don't control. You can't explain. It's going to start working in you, and it will change you. So turn to Matthew the 13th chapter, if you would. For in this chapter, Jesus strings together a number of parables to talk about this transforming, powerful, bubbling faith. The first story to open this chapter is the parable of the sower. And if you would, I'd like to ask you to stand, and we're going to read this parable together. I'll read, the parts in black, if you would read the parts in red, I would be grateful. Jesus told them this story. A farmer went out to sow seed. The birds came and ate all that seed. Where there was not enough dirt. It grew very fast there because the soil was not deep, but when the sun rose, it burned the plants. The plants died because they did not have deep roots. The weeds grew and stopped the good plants from growing. There it grew and made grain. Some plants made 100 times more grain, some 60 times more, and some 30 times more. You people who hear me, listen. May God bless this, the reading of His Word, to you, His people. Be seated, please. You know, a lot of times we think the point of this story is the farmer who went out to sow, or the soil, that the different kinds of... But one of the points of this is the seed is strong. It's powerful. It wants to grow. There's something in the seed that is generative, that is transformative. It would grow on the road if it just had a little time. It would grow in the rocks if it could just set down some roots. It would grow among the thorns if the thorns would just leave it alone for a little while. But when the seed falls someplace where it can grow, watch out. Jesus said that's how faith is. Faith wants to grow. It wants to live. It wants to produce a crop. And if you'll open your life just a crack to faith, it will put its roots deep inside you and it will produce a crop 30 times, 60 times, 100 times beyond anything you can do or imagine. The next parable he tells is a parable about wheat and weeds. You remember this parable? A man goes out and sows his field with wheat. An enemy comes that night and sows the field with weeds. The servants come to the farmer and say, "What should we do?" And the farmer says, don't worry about it. Let the wheat and the weeds grow up together. Trust the seed. It can compete with the weeds. Don't worry about what the weeds are doing. Let them all grow up together. The seed is strong, and in the end, God will sort it all out. That's how faith is, said Jesus. Trust faith. It's a powerful thing. It will run deep in your life. And though Satan is going to try to sow some weeds in your heart, the seed of God is stronger than Satan's weeds. Trust its power. Wow. The next parable he tells is about a mustard seed. A tiny seed, the smallest in the world, Jesus says. But that seed has power in it. It can generate life. It is transformative. And what comes from that seed is a mighty plant. In fact, it's so mighty, here's one, that the birds of the air nest in its branches and the creatures lie in its shade. That's how faith is, says Jesus. Even a tiny bit of faith has within it the power to create something mighty in your life. If you ever let a mustard seed of faith lodge in your heart, watch out. Before you know it, that seed is going to produce something that takes over your entire life. And then Jesus tells this story. changes the metaphor a bit. Now instead of seeds, we're talking about yeast. He says, take a lump of flour, add some water to it, and then just a pinch of yeast. Doesn't require much. Just a smidgen of yeast. And you mix it together and stand back and watch, and the yeast is a living thing. The yeast has power in it. The yeast will transfuse all of that flour and water. It will infect that entire dough, and if you watch it, it will rise. That's how faith is, said Jesus. It doesn't take much. Just a pinch, just a smidgen. But it will work its way into every nook and cranny of you, and it will do things in you you can't explain, you can't control. It will leaven your entire life. That's the way of faith. Parables of ferment. Now, listen. I'm almost done. I am perplexed that we should imagine a relationship with faith is like kicking a rock. You get out of it what you put into it. God helps those who help themselves. Don't expect faith to do in you what you're supposed to be doing on your own. Where did we ever get those kinds of notions? What perplexes me so about that kind of thinking, it is so different from the way Jesus thinks about faith. That's not his understanding at all. He planted faith in the hearts of Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He expected faith to work its way into every crevice of their life, and he anticipated that it would grow and ferment and stretch and leaven. And when the time was right, when faith was ready, Jesus was confident that the power of faith, the energy inherent in faith, that generative, transformative power that is faith, it would always result in a harvest that was 30 times, 60 times, 100 times anything that Peter, Andrew, James, and John could contribute to it. Because faith was bigger than them. And if they ever open themselves to faith even a little bit, watch out. Faith is powerful. And Jesus had confidence nothing Satan could do, no weed he could plant, could possibly compete with the power of faith. The exuberant, vigorous, dynamic, animating, powerful, transformative, fertile, creative growth of God's kingdom in the hearts of God's people. Jesus believed that faith had the power to transform dirt into wheat, and dough into bread, and water into wine, and men and women into the image of the eternal God. That is how powerful faith is. And so I just want to tell you, in the mind of Jesus, faith is much more like kicking a big dog. It doesn't just absorb energy, it transforms it. It will take what you give it and amplify it, multiply it, intensify it. It doesn't need your feeble efforts to make it work. It has power all its own. Faith will bite you with a strength beyond your expectations, beyond your imagining, perhaps beyond your wants and wishes. It will do things to you and in you you have not asked for, whether you mean for it or not, in ways you don't control, in ways you can't explain, to a degree you don't anticipate. Faith will stretch and tear you. It will break you and burst you. It will infect you and invade you. In the end, faith will have its way with you, and you will be transformed. Now, if you don't want an encounter with a faith that large, a faith that powerful, a faith that transformative, my advice to you is to let sleeping dogs lie. Just tiptoe around faith. Whatever you do, do not pretend that faith is like kicking a rock, that it's something you impart power to, it's something you control. That attitude is ruining our discipleship and destroying our witness. Now, I want you to think about that sentence when you go home tonight. But if ever you find the courage to rear back and kick faith really good, don't be surprised if faith turns around and eats you alive. I look forward to worshiping with you tomorrow. God's blessings on you this evening. May you rest in the peace of Christ.